Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening to the first of Hiraeth and That's Devolved. It's pub politics events. Hopefully we have some more, as long as this one goes without too much incident. Again, thank you so much for all coming. It is fantastic to see the interest in Welsh politics and to see so many faces that even me and Lee don't recognise. We are delighted to be joined today by the MS for Llanelli and the former Deputy Climate Change Minister, Lee Waters. Thank you very much for joining us, Lee.
Thank you for asking.
So, Lee, let's start...
I find the whole thing really weird.
Well, there's less many people...
Yeah, it's a slightly out-of-body experience. Right?
Lee, let's go right to the beginning and your entry into Welsh politics. Do you want to describe a little bit how you first got involved?
Well, I was a student, and it was the time when Labour was developing its devolution policy, and I was very keen on it and trying to explain it, and got to know Ron Davies a little bit through that. And after I graduated from Aberystwyth, I got accepted on a scholarship in Essex University to do British politics, and Ron offered me a job. And it was just when he was fighting Rhodri Morgan in the first Labour leadership contest to go and work for him. And I thought, well, I can't not do it. This is such an exciting period to be a part of. And then 3 months after I took the job, and he'd beaten Rhodri Morgan, and we were planning for the first Assembly elections, and I was going to be one of the first of Special Advisor team. He resigned in now infamous circumstances, and I was there 22, completely out of my depth, as the only person left working for him. And this was, for those of you who weren't around at the time, this was a massive tabloid story. It was the first resignation from the Blair government. It was front page on all the red tops for days, and they were in hot pursuit. So it was a really raw experience. You know, I had the sort of news editor of the Sun sort of screaming at me at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and tabloid reporters sort of tracking his car and phone tapping, no doubt, and all sorts of stuff was going on. And so there was a really odd experience. So first of all, having seen the rupture in his and Rhodri Morgan's relationship, that was very sobering, and that taught me the lesson: there are no friends in politics. There are allies, there are alliances, but alliances shift. So here you had two guys who were very close, and then one was offered a job in the government and one wasn't, and that's cast their relationship asunder. The second thing it taught me was, I saw Ron going from a position where people would be literally crossing the road, to get something from him, and then the following week, they wouldn't have pissed on him if he was on fire, and that was brutal. And of course, to get to that level in politics, you have to dedicate your whole life to it. You don't really have real meaningful relationships beyond politics. Now, as we've discussed, those relationships are generally pretty shallow and transactional when push comes to shove. So seeing somebody post all that falling away and what was left in his life, that was a very sobering and searing experience. And that told me that politicians are strange creatures. And, if you're not strange going into politics, the experience of being in politics makes you strange. So the end result is usually pretty much the same. So those were really quite sobering lessons that really put me off politics for a very long time.
You received quite a lot of scrutiny yourself, though, didn't you? I've seen you share some newspaper articles from 25 years ago where the whole thing was about you. And the old adage that if the story becomes about the staffer, that's normally a bad sign. But what was it like at that age, getting that level of scrutiny?
Well, because, at the time when the first Assembly was created, it was, it's hard to describe it now, but it's not unlike what we've been going through in the last 3 months, really. It's, everything becomes riven and personality focused. And 25 years ago, there was more of a media, believe it or not, and the Assembly was new, so there was a lot of focus on the drama around it and the personalities around it, and there was UK interest in it as well. So, I got caught up in the middle of all of that, which was, it wasn't much fun. So I managed to escape that. I stayed with him for a year. I believe in being loyal to somebody. I still, believed strongly in what he was trying to do, and still remain friends with him. And see him from time to time, but it's a weird world, and I needed to get out of it, and was lucky enough to get some unpaid work experience in the BBC, and within a couple of weeks found myself doing shifts, and after a while became a radio producer. So that, again, without any training in journalism, so that was another baptism of fire.
Well, then 15 or 16 years later, you yourself entered the Senedd, and it wasn't long before you joined the government. But before we get on to your experience in government, what do you think the difference is, in your view, between being a backbencher and being a minister? But I'm thinking more now in terms of sort of levels of accountability and scrutiny that you yourself will give to ministers and you then receive as a minister.
Well, I was, I went for a seat that Labour weren't expected to win. So it had always been a seat that changed hands between Labour and Plaid. So as a result of that, there wasn't exactly a long list of people wanting to be a candidate. And because even though I'm from the area, I was no longer living there. So politics has become very parochial in terms of candidate selection. There's this real obsession with a local premium. Are you local? Do you live locally? And so for very competitive seats, that becomes the focus. I realised that if I was going to do this, you can't do it half measures. If you want to get selected, it's really hard to get selected. You have to give it 100% effort. So I threw myself at it and got selected, but was very uncertain whether I'd win. And I worked my absolute socks off. And that's the other thing that people who aren't involved in day-to-day politics don't realise. To be a candidate, particularly in a contested seat, you have to work your arse off. And you just slog from 9:30 in the morning till 8:30 at night, just knocking door after door after door. And I did that for about 6 months, so pretty much solid. And as a result, won by 382 votes, I think simply because of just sheer determination. But having been elected in those circumstances, I was pretty convinced I wasn't going to be re-elected. And I certainly couldn't base a strategy on being re-elected. So I thought, well, I've always been sort of independent-minded. So I thought, well, there's no point being a nodding dog backbencher, trying to keep my head clean, head down rather, nose clean, mix my metaphors, and hope somebody would give me a ministerial job. So I thought, well, there's no point in doing that. And I don't want to do that anyway. I'm not temperamentally inclined. So I thought, well, let's just go for it. Let's argue, let's make an argument for something. And the M4 was the big issue. At the time, I was very much opposed to it. Carwyn Jones very much attached to it. So not the great strategy for winning friends and influencing people coming straight in and going for it. But I remember, just to go back a bit to explain the context for this, when I was a journalist, I worked for ITV, and I remember taking Peter Hain for lunch once, when there was a whole debate about should we have a referendum on the European Constitution. I can't remember, nobody even remembers that now. And Peter Hain had got himself in this position of being a very loyal sort of government spokesperson and would be in the media all the time. And he was arguing a position I don't think he really believed, but he was arguing the government line that we shouldn't have a referendum on the Constitution. And then all of a sudden, under pressure from the Daily Mail, Tony Blair just turns tail and completely changes his position. And then poor old Peter Hain had to go out and defend a completely different position. And he did it on a number of things. And I was having this lunch with him, and I was just thinking, well, the trouble is with that approach, and it's a conventional political approach, is if you, tack your sail to the prevailing wind, the wind changes, and you're rudderless. You're at sea. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I want to make an argument for something. What really encouraged me with the M4 because nobody was making the argument against. Once you start to make an argument for something, you start to persuade people because they've not heard the counter-argument. And so I was quite determined to try and stand against that because I just thought it was really bad transport economics, something I knew a little bit about, and also, what hypocrisy we had. Here we are, going around the world talking about the Future Generations Act, and at the same time doing something which was absolutely going to stuff future generations. And I thought, this is just bollocks. And why aren't people calling it out? And so I decided to do that. So it's a very roundabout way of answering your question was scrutiny, because I think scrutiny needs to come from all parts. We need to test and challenge each other within parties far more. And I think that is one of the dangers of a system where one party has dominated for so long. You have to have something to keep it fresh, to keep you on your toes. And if that's not coming from your own party, then you're in trouble. But we've created a whole state-dependent civil society in Wales with a very weak media, very few independent sources of challenge, lots of people dependent on the government for one thing or another. And we are, what my old boss, Geraint Talvin Davies, used the wonderful phrase, the land of the pulled punch. And I think that is it remains one of Wales's major problems.
You talked then about the lack of scrutiny and people changing their views. Do you think there's a degree to which that has happened between the Welsh and UK Labour parties since the general election, or even in the months before? I mean, you only need to look at what the Welsh Government were claiming about Barnett consequentials for HS2.
Well, look, there's some realpolitik about this, isn't there? You know, you are of the same party, and you have to have a relationship. You have to stand together, or surely you will hang alone. So there's a degree of, political parties are imperfect things, but they're a way of synthesizing opinion and getting a consensus behind delivering on things. You know, we would never have delivered a lot of the policies I championed, which weren't popular in all parts of the party, but we delivered them because they were in a manifesto, because the party got behind them. And that's our party system. It's imperfect, but, it's better than the alternative. America has a very weak party system and gets nothing done. So you just have to accept, if you're going to be mature about this, there are going to be imperfections. I remember my friend David Melding once saying, in politics you have to embrace paradox. And I think that's, there's a degree to which that is true. But also, let's be honest about it, the whole point of creating devolution was to have a different footprint in Wales, to accept that there was a difference in Wales. Welsh Labour was a different thing. We have a different electoral mandate. And we should see things differently, and we should have testing arguments about that. So I think that's healthy.
You talk about policies you champion. One of the things that I think will probably be associated with for a few years to come is the 20-mile-an-hour policy.
Yeah.
I mean, the statistics show that in terms of reducing injuries and saving lives, the policy's been a success. But I think there's probably a degree to which people think that the way it was communicated and the way that the public was brought along with it had some flaws. How do you reflect on both the policy and the introduction of it?
Well, I think it's a standard line of when you don't like the policy, but you don't want to say it, you blame the communications. And the communications can always be better. We had a very modest budget when we were up against, which was countercultural as a policy. We could have spent 10 times more on it and still have struggled to compete with the alternative view. So, I'm willing to put my hands up and say there's lots of things we could have done differently, but we got it over the line, and that's no small thing. And I think, once you start to unpick, the way government works and understand the many complications you're up against and the imperfections, the hollowed out local government, the risk-averse culture, all the odds are against us. So in the face of that, we got a very difficult policy, which went against the grain of embedded behaviour over the line. And for 3 quarters in a row, we've had a 25% drop in casualties and crashes. I think that's no small thing.
There's a degree to which some people could argue that the implementation of 20 mile an hour has led to, as you say, that risk-averse culture becoming even worse. You've seen the Welsh Government go back on policies like changing the school year, on the council tax reform. Do you think 20 mile an hour is in some way responsible for in exacerbating that risk-averse culture, or do you think it was just the case of the Welsh Government using an awful lot of political capital on it to get it through?
And I think progressive politics is a tension between leading public opinion and being in tune with public opinion. And that is a very delicate balancing act. It is much art as science. There is no manual for it. Mark Drakeford's government did a number of things, I think, that were on the outer end of leading public opinion. Now, you could say because of a weak media, we got away with a lot because lots of people didn't know what we were doing, and certainly we didn't get the scrutiny of it. I think that's, I think that's, I think you can certainly argue that, and in a way, because 20 mile an hour was cut through in such a way, it's one of the main things everybody knows about the Welsh Government. Yeah. It was a Daily Mail front page. We don't get that very often, in that we are now, being subjected to, rightly, the scrutiny that Westminster policies get put through every day, and we don't. And that is uncomfortable for everybody involved. But I think that's healthy. I think that's a good thing. The thing I'm disappointed by is that people have stopped making the argument for it. Do you think the party still supports it, even though they can't backtrack on it necessarily, but do you think the party still supports it? Do you think people are still willing to go back for it? Well, you'd think this was my policy, wouldn't you? 2/3 of Senedd members voted for this. This had the support of 3 political parties. It was in our manifesto. It was endorsed by the cabinet, and I'm the only person out there defending it. Which is, I suppose, that's just the reality of politics and human nature, isn't it? But it's pretty bruising. But I'm sure, in a year's time, when the stats continue to do what they're doing, people will rediscover their enthusiasm for the policy. But that's politics. It's a rough old trade.
You say it's rough. How was it for you? Because I'm sure the amount of scrutiny and I don't want to make it woe is me, Lee, but probably abuse as well that you received during that process.
Yeah, and that's part of the deal, isn't it? I'm okay with that. You can't, on the one hand, take on a policy which does go against the cultural grain and then be upset if people push back. Let's be realistic about it. We've had 70 years of a set of behaviours and policies which this challenges. And the pushback is severe, and it's more severe than we anticipated, because I think there's something about the timing as well. I think post-COVID, the mood changed. Things that were perceived to be the government telling you what to do, which before COVID, were more neutrally received. I think after COVID, in that sort of cultural milieu, were really badly received. So I think it landed in that moment, which made the pushback even more intense. So yes, it was, it hasn't been much fun. It's made me ill. I can't go into a pub in Llanelli without being called a C word. So, on a personal
level... conservative.
No, it's not that offensive. So, but that's the price of change, isn't it? You can't complain about that. If you want to try and change society and you change opinions, you have to accept that not everyone's going to agree with you. And some people, particularly when they think you're telling them what to do, and particularly when they're driving along a road and they can't understand why they're being asked to drive slowly. And that's, the real, legitimate criticism is of the implementation. There are some, not many, but there are some sections of road where it doesn't make sense. And that really winds people up. And, that's really then that creates, I think, the real difficulty.
You talked a little bit there in one of your previous answers about an under-pressure local government, but an issue I know we're both very concerned about is the capacity within the civil service in Wales. What impact do you think that has on how government functions? Because you'll often hear from people saying, oh, Welsh policy is very good, but there is an implementation gap. Not in all areas, obviously, but the Welsh policy tends to be pretty good, but there's an implementation gap. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this recently. I've been doing a series of long-form interviews for a seminar I'm teaching for Cardiff University's master's programme. I'm going to publish some interviews because very little light is shed on the inner workings of the Welsh Government. We know a fair bit about the Senedd because it's in the open. But the Welsh Government is in a black box, really, and it's impenetrable unless you're inside it, and even then it's hard to fathom sometimes. But, the Welsh Government is smaller than Cardiff Council, quite considerably smaller. It's got only about a third of the civil servants are working on policy and legislation and government business, as they call it. So you're talking a relatively small number of people, and like in any organisation, you've got some who are really good and others who are, more humdrum. That's true in every organisation I've ever worked with. And, it'd be amazing if the civil service was any different. So, you've got a government that's trying to act on every policy area, and you've got a civil service that is had the recruitment freeze throughout austerity. People left through voluntary redundancy and haven't been replaced. So, like all areas of the public sphere, it is threadbare, and we're asking it to do a lot. And I think there's a lot of the civil service field asking it to do too much or more than it's able to do. So think, when I was in the transport department, you look at Whitehall, and there were 6 Whitehall ministers covering the one job I did, and it wasn't the only job I was doing. And yes, okay, England's bigger, and the sums are bigger, but the complexity of the issues aren't bigger. They're just the same. Taxi policy is just as complex in England as it is in Wales. And we've got, one person working on it. Energy policy, we've got probably 10 people working on it, and there's 150 people working on it in Whitehall. So I think that is a real issue we need to confront, is that Mark Drakeford was very allergic to increasing the headcount of the Welsh Government because he said that when austerity started, the pact he made with local government is we're not going to be asking you to lose people while we're recruiting people. And that kind of made sense for a while, but then as soon as Brexit hit, Whitehall started recruiting enormous numbers because there was a need for it. We're having to suddenly repatriate all these laws and understand all this regulation, and we didn't. And so the civil service, and then COVID came, which was a massive strain on everybody, and the bruises of that are only starting to come out, I think. So I think you do have a civil service, which in reality is the Welsh Government, that is really struggling. And a political system, it doesn't really recognise that. And then that shows. Because I try and think objectively of what went wrong with the 20 mile an hour insofar as things did go wrong. Say 3/4 of falls in casualties. So, let's not oversell what went wrong. And I do think there's a real danger that we undermine the policy by constantly talking about the negatives. But there was a lack of capacity, lack of bodies in local government. This was a massively complex project. Literally every street in Wales was changing. And you had a civil service that had a very small number of people working on this. And you had a ministerial team under huge strain. So at every point, the system was under big pressure. And, it would be amazing if that didn't show from policies from time to time. And, we talk about Senedd capacity a lot, with increasing the need to increase it. And I think that argument has been one with a lot of people. We never talk about Welsh Government capacity, and we need to start thinking about it.
So, there's lots of bills that we've been waiting a number of years on. I think, obviously, one that's probably closest to your heart is the bus bill. Is that being held up by civil service capacity as well?
Well, again, I think there are two issues here. I was part of the referendum campaign in 2011 that made the case for extra powers. And inevitably, when you get extra powers, the temptation is, well, let's use them. Let's legislate. And politicians are terrors for saying, we will show our efficacy by passing a law. Let's pass a social partnership act to show that we care about social partnership. We don't need an act to do that, but we've got, and the Active Travel Act, which I was, a big part of, can also be criticised for similar things. These are, to some degree, performative, symbolic pieces of legislation, which is important, but we don't have the numbers to be able to keep doing that. We need to be far more focused on what we need legislation for. Because the whole process of making legislation is incredibly resource intensive. Because you have to do all these consultations, you have to get policy instructions, you have to scrutinise it, you have to have impact assessments. You then have to go to the Senedd process. It's a big deal. So the bus bill has been sitting in a queue, basically. I signed off the policy instructions before I left, and it's still sitting in a queue because there's something about the way our legal departments work, but also there's just only a small number of people or legal drafters, and they're just jammed up.
So let's talk a bit about the party for the moment. It's been a up and down year for the Labour Party in Wales. I mean, really good careful now, everybody. It's obviously the general election, at least prima facie, on the face of it, looked like pretty good results for the Labour Party. Obviously, there's some underlying issues that we'll get into, I'm sure, in a minute. They were good results. Yes. But there's also been numerous changes in leader. We won't go into that just yet, but obviously you backed Jeremy Miles. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you did?
Well, if you want me to.
Well, I mean, I was just phrasing it nicely.
It's not the subject I normally bring up over a pint. Well, I wanted Jeremy to stand last time round when Mark Drakeford stood. I thought we needed a generational change, and I think Jeremy is from the same tradition in the Labour Party that I am, of the Jim Griffiths, Cledwyn Hughes, Ron Davis, Carwyn Jones, pro-devolution tradition, and I think that's important. Jeremy also, he's impressive, he's clever, he works hard, he's got really good instincts. And I remember thinking this when I supported Carwyn Jones, who I thought was an imperfect candidate. But, you're never going to get a perfect candidate. I don't know of any perfect political leader. I don't know of any perfect business leader. So you've got to make a judgment on who's got the right set of instincts, because this job throws all sorts of things at you. You can't predetermine how people are going to react to that. But your best bet is to pick with somebody who you think has got the right set of values and the right set of responses when they are tested. And I always thought Jeremy passed that test, and that's why I wasn't part of his campaign, but I thought he'd make a good leader.
I think one of the most notable things that happened during, I can't remember now if it was during the contest or just after, when you decided to speak out about the donations to the Vaughan Gething campaign. What made you make that decision? Because it's not the kind of thing that politicians within, very tight-knit, disciplined political parties tend to do, to speak out about something in that way.
Yeah, I don't especially want to relitigate this whole thing.
No.
Because, I've written about it at length, and it is still very raw. The Labour group in the Senedd is still very raw over the whole thing, and we need to find a way to heal. So me picking over things is not terribly helpful. But to answer your question, it was an extremely difficult thing to do. I found this probably the most difficult thing I've done. I was shaking before I gave the speech. I felt sick. But I thought about it carefully. And back to your earlier question about scrutiny and my explanation of what drew me into politics and the sort of politician I wanted to be. So being in politics against the odds. I can remember saying on the night I was elected in 2016, I want to be able to look myself in the mirror when this is all over. And thinking back to my experience with Ron Davies, there's going to come a day sooner or later when it's all over. And I think you need to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, was I true to myself? Did I make the right calls? And am I happy with those choices? And that's very hard in politics because it's never black and white, straightforward. There are always complex, countervailing pressures on you at any one time, and you're part of a team. And in the Senedd, with only 30 people, those personal relationships matter. Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm hoping will be achieved by a larger Senedd group is by having more people, assuming we get more people, then
we'll get into that, don't we?
Then, it does create more space for dissent and different views. Because when you have a small group, you tend to self-censor. Because just for human relations reasons, because you don't want, to be out with your colleagues. It's a very human emotion. And so all those things were in play. But ultimately, I suppose what I really struggled with is something I thought was quite straightforwardly not right. And other people couldn't see that. And I still can't get my head around that. And to this day, people don't agree with me. And I know there are lots of people who will never forgive me for what I did, and I have to live with that. But I still think, on my analysis, I just thought it was quite, simple choice between right and wrong here, and I thought what was happening was wrong. And I was staggered by how many people who also thought it was wrong, who didn't say anything. And, back to, we are, I don't want to make this sound self-serving, but, I felt this, we are on the cusp of Donald Trump winning election again. And what are political cultures? What holds them together? What are the norms that we take for granted? And if the last 10 years in politics has taught us anything, is that progress cannot be taken for granted. You have to fight for advances all the time, to re-fight for them. And I think the way that our discourse has soured since Brexit, the way the people have felt emboldened to be racist and to say awful things since Brexit is very troubling. I think the way that Trump has behaved, the way that Boris Johnson has behaved, I talked in that speech about norm spoiling, this idea that you accept a lower standard, and then if you get away with that, that then becomes the new standard, and all of a sudden we are a race to the bottom. And somebody who believed in devolution and the project of devolution about creating something different and Welsh and better, I thought, well, if you're not going to defend this line, then what is the point in what's the point of living with the misery of life in politics if you're not going to stand up and use that platform and say, I don't agree with this? And that's ultimately the decision I came to, and it's very difficult still. But
do you have any sympathy for Vaughan, personally?
Yeah, I feel very sad about it. I don't understand, genuinely, there's an old line, isn't there? Don't judge.
Because you've known Vaughan for a very long time.
Yeah, I was in university with him, and I've always gone on well with him. But, the old line of don't judge a man till you've walked a mile in his shoes, because he'll be a mile away and you'll have his shoes. That's I like that version of the saying. But, Vaughan sees this clearly very, very differently to me, And I don't understand that other point of view. I genuinely don't understand it, but it's clearly very heartfeltly held view, and there's a real disconnect between the people who still think that was right and what I did was wrong, and that's one of the things I think is one of the things I worry about the state of our party now and the state of politics now, is we haven't really dealt with that, because we've very quickly moved on. And I understand the instinct among parties to circle the wagons and bring the team together. But I think there's still an unresolved issue there, which there is zero appetite to revisit, and I no wish to revisit either. But it remains unresolved, and I think that's a problem.
Do you think Llanelli, since she has been elected, has managed to heal any of those wounds since what happened?
Well, to be fair to Llanelli, she wasn't agitating for the job. She did the job as a public service, which I think everybody in the Labour Party should be very grateful to her for, and owes her a degree of loyalty to support what she has had to do and the gap she's had to stand in. And I think people, one thing I would say about Llanelli Morgan, she is, I think, genuinely the nicest person in the Senedd. She is a genuinely nice, kind, thoughtful, lovely person, and that comes across, I think. Even though she says things, sometimes you think, oh God, why do you say that? And
well, we've all been there, yeah.
I'm aware of the irony of that statement. But it's because she is authentic,
yeah.
And I think that's, and I hope I'm authentic, and for good or for ill. But I think in a mood of anti-politics, I think people respond to authenticity, and she is who she is, and I really like her for that. Of course, like everybody else, there are bits of strength and bits of weaknesses. And the good thing with Llanelli, she is, recognises she needs to bring people around her who are good at those things. And I think that's to her huge credit. So has she healed the wounds? I think she has to a degree, because people, all sides, want her to do well and want to support her and want to help her. And I think she has sort of a general sort of enthusiasm about her that is just helping us all to move on and focus on, the challenge that is ahead of us. But, there are, as I said at the time, again, without much popularity, I think there was a moment there for us to have a deep debate about the future direction of Welsh Labour, and we didn't.
Yeah, I think me and you were pretty much the only two people saying there should be a leadership election. So at least we've got something in common now.
Well,
yeah.
I've never been afraid to be on the unpopular side of the argument, for good or for ill.
Obviously now we're all thinking towards the election. It was basically immediate as soon as the general election votes were counted. What do you think about that vision that both Llanelli and the party are going to have as we head towards 2026?
Well, I think we're going to have one. I think is the first point.
Yeah, nice start.
We'll have been in power for 27 years at the next Senedd election, which is clearly without precedent. And we know the most powerful message in politics anywhere in the world is change. And I remember Mark Drakeford made this point before the last Senedd election. We are always, every time it gets harder for Welsh Labour to make an argument for its re-election, because that argument of change becomes more potent every time. And we've got to, Llanelli's first priority has been to scrape the barnacles off the boat, in the Lyndon Crosby phrase. This is her judgment, is to ditch some policies which were bringing us drag, if you like, and were not going to help us to focus on the task ahead. And that's a judgment any leader's got to make. But we need to go beyond that. I think that's a good stabilising strategy, but that's not an election strategy. And I think one of the things we need to do now is to have a pretty whole-scale change of personnel. I think we need to dramatically refresh the Labour benches. I think there will be lots of people standing down for the next election. I reckon at least a third of the group will stand down, by themselves. I think the more who think about that, the better, really. Clearly there's a balance. You do need some continuity. But our best chance of being able to present a face of change at the next Senedd election is by having changed people. and having a fresh message and a new sense of energy and impetus that we have the appetite and the energy to keep on facing what are deeply intractable and difficult problems. And so, I'm adding my name onto that list of willing volunteers onto the lifeboat. I'm not going to be standing next time. I've told my constituency party today about that. Because I think for me, I'll have been in politics for 10 years, and I think 10 years is enough. It's, as we touched earlier, it's brutal. It's hard, if you do it properly, it's very, very hard work and very intense, particularly when you are, trying to do difficult things. It's even more wearing. But also I think people stay in politics too long. And I can understand why. It's so hard to get into. And once you're in it, it's so hard to get out of. So the natural thing to do, because, there aren't employers queuing up to take on ex-politicians. Something I'm very conscious of and quite scared about. Because I'll be 50 at the election, I'd like to do other things. I need to do other things. But you're shop sold goods as a politician. And I think that's a real problem for us as a society. Because we need people to be coming in, and this is one of the things, I thought Jane Davidson set a brilliant example when she stood down in 2011, when she didn't need to and went on to do other things. I think we need to appeal to people who are mid-career to come and do a stint of public service, not see this as a political career that you're there forever, to do a stint for a period, serve your country and your community, and then go off and do something else. And I think we need more of that, because the analogy I use, it's a relay race. And, I think you run like buggery for a bit, and then you need to hand the baton on to fresh legs, and they can run like buggery for a bit. And that's the only way, the problems we face as a country are very significant. And we need fresh waves of energy to throw at them. And that's why I think, I've decided 10 years is enough for me, and I think others would do well to consider the same.
So for those in the room who aren't members of the Labour Party, they won't be aware that, they perhaps won't be aware that emails have gone out to party members asking people if they want to stand or if they want to nominate what the party calls the best and brightest in Wales. Do you think the party will actually do that though, or do you think it will be your usual suspects? Because as you say, it is so hard to get selected as a Labour candidate. You need such a huge amount of institutional knowledge, so many connections to get over the line. Do you think we are going to get a brand new cohort of people, or do you think it will be people who have been waiting in the wings for so many years?
I think the brilliant thing about elected politics is it's so complex. It's fascinating. It's intellectually very stimulating to understand how the different dynamics interplay and how it works. So it's a very rewarding thing to do. But it's hard. And I think there's I've sat next to so many boring people at business dinners who say, oh, the quality of the politicians are rubbish. They should have people from the private sector to go in and sort it out. I think, you have no idea what you're talking about. Very often jobs in the private sector are quite straightforward and binary. Politics is not like that, and it requires a different complex skill set. So I have no doubt there'll be a bunch of people who look at it and think, oh, I fancy that, I could do a bit of that. And don't know the level of commitment it requires. So I absolutely want a whole new bunch of the brightest and the best to think they can do it, but also they should have no illusions about how hard it is and how hard you've got to work and how difficult it is to get selected, because you basically have to go around the houses of people you've never met before, who aren't expecting you or don't want you, on a Sunday afternoon and say, you're a member of the Labour Party, would you vote for me in this election? And you have to do that week after week after week. And then you have to persuade them, and you have to get them out, and you have to get them to vote. And then you have to do the same thing again to a bunch of voters who don't want you and don't know who you are, and are, putting the kids to bed or whatever when you're knocking on their door. So you need a level of resilience and determination. So it's great that the Labour Party is saying to people, we don't just want to select the same old people, but also, let's not be under illusions about it. They're not going to just give people seats. People are going to have to fight for those seats, and that is that's not easy.
I mean, the big question with this new system is how does this new system change the overall dynamic of the Senedd? I mean, apart from the most die-hard of Labour supporter, pretty much everyone accepts there's going to have to be some sort of coalition. How do you think the UK party would respond to Welsh Labour joining a coalition with Plaid Cymru?
Well, there's a range of scenarios, isn't there? And we're some way out yet. The polls today, are not encouraging, but the election isn't today.
Yeah.
And who knows what's going to happen at a UK level, at a global level, and where the public mood will be in 18 months' time. So I don't think we should just assume that today's polls are going to be what we're facing. And also, there will be scrutiny of other parties. Okay, Labour is in, has been in a tough spot. And yes, I hear people say, didn't Hiraeth do well in the leaders' debates? But it takes more than that. Leanne Wood did well in the leaders' debates. And, Reen's a former TV presenter. Of course he did well in the TV debates. But being a leader of a party and being a leader of a government is a whole different ballgame. And, a week in the life of a First Minister will test, the mettle of anybody. So I think, we do need to start thinking seriously about who the alternatives are. And you don't just need one person, you need a team of people. And what other party has that team of people? I don't think they do. But you're right, of course, the PR system we've chosen is more proportional than the current system. And the current system has never delivered a majority to any party. So it's highly likely there's going to need to be some form of cooperation between more than one party after the next election. That's kind of what we've designed the system to do. That's a good thing. It's not easy, but it's a good thing. So Labour is likely to be, if not the largest party, a large party, and it's going to have to support a budget, if not of its own, of another party's, either in some form of cooperation agreement, confidence supply, full coalition, or just a one-off budget deal. And that's uncharted territory for the party, were we to be in that situation. And the question of how, were that situation to come to pass, the Labour Party would be in trauma, to be clear. It's held together by being in government, and if it wasn't in government, we saw what happened to Scottish Labour. That's a whole different dynamic. And so, who knows where that leads, and the dynamic then with the party in Westminster. But my plea is, let's not go there. We don't need to go there.
Yeah.
We didn't have to be where we're at. We didn't have to find ourselves in the situation we found ourselves in. That could have been prevented by different choices at earlier points. And let's learn the lesson of that mistake. We're looking at a bleak scenario. It's not inevitable. We have choices, and let's make sensible ones.
Yeah, you'll often hear people in the Labour Party, and just to put it on the record, I disagree, who say that the Labour Party needs a term out of government to refresh and renew. And to them, I always say, ask Scottish Labour how they feel after being out of power for 17 years and how likely that is. But I think you probably agree that renewal is possible within government. It just needs a lot of fresh faces.
Well, it gets harder and harder every time, doesn't it? And at some point, look, you can't have a party in power forever. That is not healthy. And at some point, that's going to come to pass. But it's not something any political party will volunteer for. And my argument has always been, if we want to remain fresh and have fresh things to say, we have to artificially create a challenge to ourselves, because the opposition is our problem. Because they are so poor. There's a real problem we have in Wales. We have a weak civic society, we have a weak political opposition, we have a weak media, and that...
Again, thanks.
That then makes... Well,
Yeah, no, I know.
And I was part of the weak media, so I'm not making judgments, I'm just trying to be objective about it. It's a problem for the ruling party, and it's a problem for the civil service. We need to test each other, and if we can't have the forces you'd normally look to in a democracy to do that, we have to create forces. But there's never been a great deal of appetite for that, funny enough.
So, the one story that keeps bubbling up about the next Senedd election is the rise of reform. And you obviously had a very personal experience in Llanelli about the rise of reform. Obviously, only, 1,500 votes or so away from winning that seat. So, why do you think reform are making this big surge at the moment?
So I think this is a genuinely worrying point. So, I speak as a constituency representative, and dealing with, I kind of understand politics at a macro level because of the things I've done. Community politics has been a new experience for me, and a really interesting and challenging one. And particularly in a seat like Llanelli, which is 60 miles from Cardiff, feels different. It's a post-industrial, deindustrialized economy. It's a very different sense of place. And it's a whole series of complex problems, which there aren't easy answers to. And people look to the MP and the MS to fix them. So one of the things people often say to me is, look at the town centre, it's terrible, why haven't you made it better? And I kind of don't know where to start, really, answering that question, because they're right. And it's not an unreasonable question, but the problem is of a globalization world where governments have become weaker, agency is fragmented, problems are complex. There's not a lever that can be easily pulled to fix these things. And I think the things that happened in Llanelli the last year, so we've had the horrendous situation of the Stradey Park Hotel, which was commandeered by the Home Office to house asylum seekers, which has been one of the most upsetting experiences of my adult life, really. It's been absolutely horrendous, and people outside of Llanelli don't really understand. They haven't sensed it. If this was in Newport or Barry, everybody would have heard about it. Because it's in Llanelli, you haven't. And the trauma and the division it's caused in that community is going to take a very long time to heal. And it's surfaced a nastiness there, and it's given permission to racist attitudes by a very small minority, but nonetheless, it is there. We need to call it out and say it's there, is deeply troubling. But the truth is, I couldn't do anything about that. That was a Home Office decision, and people are angry with me for not standing on the picket line with a megaphone saying Wales is for the Welsh. That's what they wanted me to do, and I was not going to do that. But there's a misunderstanding or a disconnect of why didn't you do something about it. So a sense of disempowerment. We've had a really brilliant special school in Llanelli. We've been promised a new building. The council have cancelled the building. And these are decisions made in Carmarthen. Now, the easiest thing for me to do is get a round of applause in Llanelli, which is to say Carmarthen gets too much and Llanelli doesn't get enough. Everybody thinks that is true, and that is an easy applause line. But this is a decision made in Carmarthen about a much-needed resource in Llanelli that I am, again, powerless to influence. I can go on marches, I can do petitions, but I can't change that decision. There's now the future of the minor injuries unit at Prince Philip Hospital. Similarly, health board, we've got a real accountability gap in the way that we run health in Wales. We've got these bodies, there's a bit of a sort of a convenient relationship going on where we say it's all the health board's fault and they say it's all the Welsh Government's fault. And nobody really gets the grips of who is responsible for these decisions and how do you change them. And you've got a health board is made up largely of executives of the staff of the NHS and independent members, so-called, quite a number of whom are former NHS employees. And they're part of a groupthink. And there's no scrutiny and there's no challenge. So if you watch the recording of those meetings, it's pretty superficial stuff. So again, a decision is being made about facilities people feel very strongly about. People look to me to fix it. I don't have control over it. So and similarly, the future of Tartar in Port Talbot, which affects my area, and then the knock-on effects for Trostre. The picture overall I see is a number of things where bad things are happening, and people are looking to their elected representatives, rightly, to influence them. And it's the worst answer in the world for me to say to you, but I can't. That's a terrible answer. There's a lot of truth in it. On the other hand, you then have a bunch of people who give simple answers to all of those things. And they have a group of people they blame for all our problems, and they have an anti-politics message which resonates, and they will take up a lot of votes because people feel powerless and disempowered. And I think we've got, and austerity has made that worse. When things are going well, people aren't that bothered about others. But when things aren't going well, people are bothered about others. And so I think we're in a quite a fragile, febrile state at the minute, and we don't have good enough answers, and it really worries me, and reform will speak to that pain. And we as a progressive force need to have a better answer of how we can help those people. And quite a lot of that is about the economy and spending and the ability to show people that we are making their lives better, which is something we haven't been able to do for a decade and a half.
Lee, thanks so much for speaking with us this evening. I mean, we're going to have a little break now and then a Q&A, but one more question from me before we depart. You've announced you're not standing again at the next election, but what is next for you?
Well, I know I'm pretty terrified because I don't know. So I'd like challenging myself always. I make sort of sideways moves fairly regularly. This is the longest I've done any job. So I want to do something where I feel I can make a difference and have an impact that is a fresh thing to do, that doesn't involve me getting shouted at. But what that is, I've got 18 months to think about.
I have been speaking for nearly an hour with Lee now, but it's your turn. So if anybody has any questions they'd really like to ask Lee, then please stick your hand up and I'll try and pick. That was pretty quick, Ian.
I tried to be.
I'll do it 2 or 3 to go, and if you could keep your answers your questions pretty concise, and Lee, if you could try and keep your answers similarly phrased.
As you can see, the room, I think, skews a bit younger, and I think I'm not alone in saying that as young people, the cost of housing and renting is one of their biggest concerns. And Welsh Government, perhaps people will see they don't have the best record on this. So do you think there's been some missed opportunities over the years with making housing more affordable for young people in Wales?
Well, I've been on the housing committee since I've come back onto the backbenches, and I think the evidence is pretty clear that there's massive market failure and there's huge failure of the state to step in actively and fill the gap left. One thing we've really suffered from is just a lack of affordable rented social housing. And in fact, the whole term of affordable has become so debased and taken over by the market that it no longer means what you think it means. But cheap rented, good quality housing have just not been provided since really Thatcher led the sell-off of the council houses, and I think that is a significant failing. It's not easy to build houses at scale, and we haven't been doing very well at it. I've been asked to help identify what some of the blockers are, because there are a large number of houses in the pipeline but aren't moving. So why is that? So that's what I'm going to be trying to focus on over the next couple of months to try and see if we can speed that up. But I agree with you. We've got huge intergenerational unfairness. We've got this idea that we've become addicted on, that you need to get on the housing ladder, that we have to own housing. And I think that is, the big myth that needs busting, and that culture change of where we see ownership, which is basically massive capital inflation for those who are already on the housing ladder. And so long as we are focused obsessively politically on that idea and not focusing on providing good quality housing for rent provided by state or non-state actors, then I think we're not really going to shift the dial. So it's as much a think about political culture as it is about delivery.
Thank you. We go to Ian over there, please.
I was wondering about the micro-timing of the standing down of Mark Drakeford, therefore the leadership election, therefore the pushing through of a 20-mile-per-hour policy. On many, many doors, those things went together like a total reform dream. Bucket of sick thrown in the face of Labour at level after level after level. Was there any thought within Welsh Labour, within the Welsh Government, about how messaging might be carried through into 2024, which is obviously going to be a general election year? And the way that the 20-mile-per-hour bounced off of the racism of reform usual suspects was depressing, very much coordinated by reform and their social media operators at various levels. So, yeah, if you can fill us in a bit on the micro-timing of stuff, through the end of 23 into 24, particularly around 20 miles per hour, but the rest of it as well, which all came out so badly on the doorstep.
Well, life has taught me never assume there's a plan. And I think that's a pretty good starting point for any analysis. First of all, I'd say a lot of the people who were particularly agitated by 20 mile an hour were not Labour voters in the first place. There were a lot of people who might have been Labour voters in the past, people who voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, people who voted for Brexit. There's a big, I think, cultural cut across here. This has become an identity issue. And for me, I often found that people who were against 20 mile an hour were also Brexit voters, and those who were in favour of 20 mile an hour were Remain voters. So I think there's something more going on in the water other than just an open-minded analysis of policy. There's something about how people feel. It's about culture, it's not about facts. That said, as I said earlier, because I think of the pushback post-COVID of people feeling controlled, it did have a degree of opposition which hadn't been anticipated, because we were polling years out, and 3 years out it had 80% support. 2 years out it had 60% support, and then it had 45% support, I think, and that was tracking what was normally expected, something called the Goodwin curve. As you get closer to a policy, popularity dips and then starts to climb again. It didn't quite track that trajectory in the way we were expecting it to. So there would definitely be Labour voters who didn't like it and were opposed to it, and it did cause us problems. But I think it is one of these, what's called low salience issues. So yes, 75% of people say they don't like it, but not many of them will determine how they vote because of it. It's something they don't like, but it's not something they feel as the top priority issue for them. I'm not minimising it. It was a very difficult policy, and I'm not diminishing it and the difficulty it caused to candidates at all. But the timing of it was set years in advance. And we didn't know when that general election was going to be called. Mark Drakeford's decision to stand down was not predetermined. I assumed he would stay a further year. And so I think that, these things are often sort of random events that look like there's a pattern, and that's just happenstance.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Lee. And there's one more question over there, and then we'll do another round of 3.
Declare an interest, first and all, as a former employee of Lee's, so not an audience plant. Lee, I think the thing that sets you apart from a lot of other Senedd members, particularly on social media, was probably the amount of engagement you had with the public, and that is a span which ran right through from 2016 through till, I think, only quite recently. I think after Stradley Park, there's probably an element of clawing back. I'd be interested to know if you think that was the right course of action, to be as active as you were on social media through your time as a Senedd member. And more importantly, I think I get the sense in my generation, at least, there's a pulling back from social media. Nobody my age uses Facebook anymore. X, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish. Social media has changed onto platforms such as TikTok and so on. What do you think is the future of engagement for politicians, with the public, through social media? How do you see that playing out in the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because the avenues available for politicians to engage are becoming less and less. And that sense of distance between sort of leaders and led, I think, is very problematic. So local newspapers really don't exist in the way they did when I was elected. So it used to be, people would know what I was doing because of the Llanelli Star, and that's no longer the case. So how do I get a message out to show people I am doing things and engaged in their lives and can be held to account? Facebook I found brilliant for a very long time, and as you say, I engaged personally. I did not staff it out. I did it all myself through COVID. It was very intensive, but very useful in directly answering people's questions. And I believe in being open and accountable. That is something I feel very strongly politicians should be, and I think that should be mirrored by my behaviour, and so my wife would get very frustrated with me for spending all this time on Facebook and getting wound up about it and constantly being, your head in it. But for me, it was a key part of what I was in politics for, to have that direct interaction. But the tone really soured after COVID. And as you say, we had the study park issue in Llanelli, then the 20 mile an hour, and it no longer became people in Llanelli asking me questions. It became people from everywhere just giving me shit. And it just became really unpleasant, and it stopped being fun. And it wasn't about engagement; it was just insults, and it just, it just ground me down. And the algorithms both for Facebook and Twitter changed, which both for the worse. And so I reluctantly just decided to withdraw from it altogether. So now I have no control of my Facebook account. My staff do it all. I tell them, I agree what to put on it, but I can't see the comment. We've stopped comments, which I think is really sad. And I've come off Twitter. And there isn't anything else replacing it. And I think the problem is that then creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. And we know that the right are very active and quite skilled in some instances on simple messages that social media loves. And I think it is a real area of danger.
Yeah, I would just adding on that, I mean, thinking about TikTok, which is something I'm ashamed to say at my age I am still on. But if you look at how parties of the right, like Reform, are using social media platforms like that, it is absolutely no surprise that their biggest growth demographic is, younger voters and men under 30, really.
Yeah.
It's something we've got to think about, I think, as we move forward, how to tackle, right?
Yeah, I really like Instagram, but I like putting nice pictures on Instagram. That's what I use Instagram for.
Okay, well, I'm not sure we'll see you doing any trending dances on TikTok anytime soon.
But it wouldn't be authentic. See, this is what I struggle with. The thing I liked about social media is you can be authentic.
Yeah.
And to your question, Steve, do I regret engaging so much? I think one of the things, I suppose, is tone is so difficult, isn't it, on social media? And I took a view of, I'm not here to be a punch bag. So if you want to engage in a debate with me, great. If you're just going to have a go at me, I'll have a go back to you. But that doesn't come across well. And so people say, well, he's very arrogant on social media. There was a complaint to the Standards Commissioner that I was sarcastic on social media. Guilty.
Great, we're going to have another round of 3 questions. Any others? David at the back and at the front here, Rich. Sorry, I'm going to make you move around the room.
I think it's probably fair to say that you took your role as a backbencher quite seriously, asked some perhaps difficult questions that we don't always see from Labour Group backbenchers. I'm just curious which role you've enjoyed more, being that kind of in that scrutiny role as an active Labour backbencher, or in your role within government?
Well, being in government, because there's a purpose to it. Being a backbencher is just, it's 50% performance, really, isn't it? It's performance no one's watching, so what's the point of that? I've really struggled going back into committees because I find the culture of scrutiny in the Senedd to be very underarm bowling, and it drives me mad. But the problem is I've come in and there's a real culture clash. So I've come back in my full Newsnight mode, and it just jars. And so I've had quite a bit of pushback in the committees for saying, well, didn't think that was appropriate, or you're too hard. And I'm just, well, look. Come on, we're a parliament. We should be testing. We should be tougher on each other. But I seem to be the only one who thinks this, and it's not much fun, really.
Land of the pull punch again, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the problem.
Everyone knows each other, though, right? As well.
Well, it's just a bit. Oh. I just think we got to do better than this. Yeah. Because because it's small, and because people are on too many committees. So I'm now on 4 committees currently, just as a temporary thing. And it's mad, isn't it? I used to love being on the Public Accounts Committee when I was first elected. I'd properly do the reading, I'd properly prepare, and I would scrutinise, and it was effective. But But it's, you know, that takes time and commitment, and you can't do that when you're on multiple committees. And most MPs aren't on one committee, and most MSs are on at least two. And you know, then you find yourself going in, even though you don't like it to begin with, you get handed the questions, and then, you know, as a government minister, you get shown the questions, and so you get to the point where some people are reading out questions and then ministers are reading out the answers. Well, AI can do that. You know, we got to stop that. I promise some backbenchers really like being given questions to answer. So when I tried to challenge it, some are like, well, don't take that away from me. So I think it would help to have a whole bunch of new people in. I think the expansion of the Senedd gives us an opportunity to reboot the culture. And I think by having people on fewer committees, that will help. But it's not just about numbers, it's about attitude, it's about what we expect of us, each other and ourselves, and not turning our parliament into some suboptimal county council. You know, but that's about us expecting more of each other, really. But also, you know, it's also about civil society stepping up and being prepared to take it as well. We just need to raise the level of the whole thing. That's why I do worry a bit about the future of devolution. You know, we're 25 years in. You know, it's not fully embedded. There are some evidence to show opposition is growing, and I think, given the likely scenarios ahead of us, I think we're going to have some very turbulent times. If we get an injection of reform in, you know, the last time we had that, they imploded and started eating each other. So, you know, there's a chance that'll happen again. But, you know, they are going to, you know, populists are going to do populist things. And, you know, they are going to start, I think, debasing the culture as well. And I think there needs to be just a seriousness amongst everybody involved in the Senedd on all sides, just to raise the level and demand more of each other.
Thanks, Lee. Question at the back, yes.
Yeah, thanks. So first off, I want to say that I think tickets for the rest is politics were about 40 quid or 50 quid a head, so this represents extraordinary value for money. So my question is, we've had quite a lot of talk now about reform and right-wing politics in Wales, and I want to take us back to 2014, 2015, when something called Momentum was started. Now, I looked at that with great interest because at the very start, some people may not remember this, but it was a tool to organise anybody from left-wing politics. So I thought this is fascinating because there's a hegemony within media, as we know, right-wing, and particularly in Wales, where most people still get the news from the Daily Mail. So this really offered the first opportunity that I'd seen for, broadly speaking, the left-wing to coalesce around a single campaigning vehicle. Very interesting what they were doing. 6 weeks in, they killed that wider membership, and they said, right, you have to now support the Labour Party. So my question is, in the face of what you faced in Llanelli, what we will all face probably in communities with the rise of populism, opposition to the Senedd itself, what's the vehicle for left-wing parties to campaign on issues that they can roughly agree on?
That's a very good question. Well, that's a historical question, because the left has always fallen into the People's Front of Judea problem from the life of Brian, isn't it? I think that there's a purity on the left where people start turning on each other because they're not pure enough. And the one thing I struggled with Momentum was I don't like tribalism of any kind. I can remember, so by any objective measure, I am a left-wing politician. I never use that term because I just don't think it's helpful, and I don't really like labels like that. So the work I did on the foundational economy, was profoundly challenging the orthodox economic model. But there was I don't find the left, or the right for that matter, but the left terribly interested in policy. They're more interested in badges and being a tribe. And I find that very frustrating. And then it's not about, there's no interest in momentum in Wales, for example, in the foundational economy. They just wanted to talk about whose side you're on. So I remember joining some meetings with John McDonnell and the mayor up in the north. And very quickly, the discussion came to, on policy about foundational economy, and the discussion very quickly came to, do you support momentum? Let's slag off the leadership. And I'm like, I don't care about this. What are you talking about? We've got some really serious economic model problems here, which take some serious people and serious thinking to shift. And if all you want to talk about is whose side you're on and how do we all, out-purify each other, grow up. But that never made me very popular with the left, funny enough.
Right, we've got one more question. I think it's here. Thank you. Rich?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to top that question in terms of engagement. But one thing I wanted to ask is kind of more around the future of devolution. And I wanted to know your thoughts on the challenges that are going to be between a Welsh Labour government and a UK Labour government moving forward in the next couple of years. Like, what do you think are the roadblocks / potential issues that will arise there, rather than... I know I don't want to make it about a positive thing, because I wanted to hear your sort of insight on that.
Well, look, there should be tension. That's a healthy thing. That's what devolution is about. It's about us having an agenda that is right for Wales. And that is going to be sometimes at odds with what the UK government think is right for England. And that's okay. Why are we threatened by this? Why are we suddenly seized on, a Punch and Judy caricature of that's problematic and the Labour Party's falling apart? That's not true. It's doing what devolution was designed to do. And I think we need to have the maturity and confidence to say, look, we still share the same values, we're still part of the same movement, but we've got different mandates, we've got different geographies. We're going to argue what's right for this geography, and that should be all right. Let's be pluralists about this. But there is still that very binary, childish, you're either on our side or you're on the other side. And the media narrative plays into that, and as do other politicians. I'm not just blaming the media for this. So I think we need a degree of, taking the lumps here a bit. And Labour should be standing up for Wales. That is both politically a slogan that works for Welsh Labour, and also it's actually a very nifty description of what devolution was designed to be about. Let's own that, be confident about that, not shy about that, and we can have different priorities. Now, my experience of working in any UK organisation, Wales is small and irrelevant and a bit of a pain. In every UK organisation I've ever come to. And I've always been trying to be positive to say, well, look, yeah, okay, all those things are true. However, we are also have an ability to work together and bring solutions in a way you can't do at the UK level, because there's just too many people involved. So we can get all these different departments together, all these different organisations together, and create alliances and do interesting things. So experiment stuff here. We'll show it can be done differently, and then if it works, scale it. And that's what I try to do on the roads review and foundational economy and 20 mile an hour and other policies, and saying, okay, we can, because of our size and agility, we can do things a bit differently. Let's try that, and let's see that as a positive and try and sell to the UK organisation. Here's, yes, there's grief, but use the positives as well. And I think we're not there yet in terms of the maturity of understanding what a multi-nation UK looks like. And there's a lot of anxiety and resistance at a London, England level about this. There's also, you speak to people in London, they just, they're very pleased with themselves, they're doing very well. There's a lot going on, they don't need to be worried. They can't really get their head around it, they don't need to be worried about it. So they don't worry about it. And then we have to fight very hard to get, and that's no different with a Labour government or any other government, because Whitehall is still Whitehall, and people in London are still people in London. So that's the whole point of devolution, is we can't rely on a man in a white charger in Whitehall to come over the hill and rescue us. We have to fix it ourselves. And that's why I believe in devolution. But the flip side of that, in turn, within the Labour Party is, Christ almighty, let's just be realistic about this. So there are tensions, and there are, Joe Stevens has got a different view of what we should be doing than I have. That's fine. But I'm elected to the Senedd, and we have a mandate, so we'll do what we decide, thanks very much. And that's how it should be.
And on that note, before Transport House comes for our memberships. Thank you so much to Lee. I'd have a round of applause for Lee. Thank you also to porters. Again, like I said, please support your local venues like this one.
Can I apologise that you've all had to drink out of plastic glasses, but this is on security grounds.
Yeah. Yes, please support your wonderful local venues and enjoy your plastic glasses for the purpose of this evening. Thank you to our friends at That's Devolved as well. Give a round of applause. And thank you so much for coming to hear that. I mean, it's fantastic to see so many people interested, rather terrifyingly for me and Lee. There's a number of people in here that aren't as old as the Senedd. But it's amazing to see so much interest here. And yeah, so again, thank you for supporting local venues, Welsh politics, and independent Welsh media. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Hiraeth podcast, please do so. You can find us on all the socials at Hiraeth Pod. You can go to our website at www.whalespolitics.com. And thank you so much for supporting us with your presence. But if you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/Hiraeth Pod. Thank you, everybody. And yes, I did have Richard's voice in my head going, "Don't fluff the accent." Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.